Welcome to Auburn, Our Story, a series presented by the White River Valley Museum exploring unique perspectives on our area's extraordinary history. In 1908, the Ford Motor Company introduced the Model T to the world. By the 1920s, the Model T was being sold in almost every city in America, and in 1922, Wayland Scarff opened the first Ford dealership in Auburn at 222 East Main Street. In this episode, Way's son, Bob Scarff, shares some of his experiences from a life in the automobile business, stories from Auburn's time as the Little Detroit of the West.
I was born in Seattle way back in 1917, so it was a long time ago, and lived in Seattle for 4 or 5 years, and then ended up in Auburn when I was 5 years old. My dad had a service station out in Seahurst, which is west of Burien, and just a little service station, and those were in 1921, the early 20s, so they were selling a lot of Model T Fords, and the West Seattle Ford dealer, decided that they wanted to have some representation out there, and my dad put a couple Model Ts out around his service station, and he sold so many Model Ts that the dealer in West Seattle took him in as a partner. Ford Motor Company needed some dealer in Auburn, so Ford brought my dad out here, set him up in 1922 as the dealer, and I don't think he had any money, but he was Ford dealer in Auburn, and we were at 222 East Main, and took over the dealership, and the Model T sold well in the 20s, and then came to 1929 and the crash, and things got pretty rough in all the businesses, and the banks closed and so forth, and somehow my dad got through that, but those were tough times in 32 and 33, and there wasn't much money around. It was I remember you did by barter, and you'd have the groceryman give you groceries, and you'd take care of his car and keep it running, and tires and so forth, and so we all got along okay, but things were pretty tight, and I always looked back and felt that was fortunate for me, because I found out what it was like to live in hard times and turn off the lights and save this and save that. And I remember my mother hated to even phone Seattle because that was long distance, and these were things that were good later on when I had ups and downs in the business here in Auburn, why some of those habits came in handy. But he worked through those tough times, and then things are going pretty well. In the 30s, we had a really good product and good acceptance. And then I think 39 was a good year, and but then World War II came along, and my dad was without cars for 4 years. In fact, he had some 42 Fords when Pearl Harbor came about, and with those cars that he had in hand, the government said you can't sell any cars any longer. It was frozen. So he had, what was he going to do with these new Fords that he had in stock? So he, I think, came up with the idea of one of the first dealers to be a lessor, and he leased them back to the government. But it was pretty tough getting through those 4 war years with nothing but parts and service to sell, and he was quite an inventor, and had lots of ideas, and he'd take some of our Fordson tractor equipment and make rigs to haul logs out of the forest and the loggers, and so he got by innovation, a lot of it. Well, there was a Mercury dealership at Lincoln Mercury, and there was Matson, Tom Matson's dad, had the Chrysler, and then there was a Chevrolet dealership, and Howard Bothell Sr. Came into town. I think it was in '39. I can't remember the year, but we had the basic GM, Chrysler, Ford, and it was a Pontiac dealership. Studebaker, there was a Studebaker dealer, Doxson, Studebaker. Old Mr. Doxson, a friend of my dad's, and then there was his son, Kenny, and Myron, and so forth. So we've had a lot of second, third generation dealerships here in Auburn. Sitting on the showroom floor, and when I was 8 years old, I was pretending to drive the Model Ts and so on. So I remember I got a Model T coupe, a used one, when I was 14, and you had to be 15 to get a license. But I'd go down the alleys and so forth, and so I started driving at an early age. I'd work in the service station that we had next door to the dealership, and we had come along with these people, the Firestone Tire Company too, and we put new tires on, and I'd get the used ones that were down to the tread practically, and so I got tires for my car that way, my used car. So I was around the cars, that's for sure. I went all through school, started in grade school here, went through junior high and then high school, played football at Auburn High School, and I think I was a short side guard. 155 pounds is I eat 2 meals at a time, and I still couldn't gain enough weight. But those were good experiences, and it was a nice city to grow up in and so on, and everybody knew everyone, and it was a very good opportunity. I know I went then to university, and you had to check on your ability in math and English and so forth, and I didn't have to take any remedial courses, and some of my friends in the old Phi Delta fraternity had to take bonehead English for 3 quarters or something, and again, get no credit for it, but they hadn't had as good an education as I had had in Auburn. I'd come back and work vacations and holidays and so forth, just helping wherever I could. I then, in the latter part of my college, I had sold some cars and worked in the sales department, and I was doing that actually in '41 when I felt that something was going to happen the way things were going in Europe, and that we were going to get into this war, and I thought rather than be in a foxhole, if I could be lucky enough to get in the Navy Air Corps, I could be upstairs instead of down in a foxhole. So I went out to Sandpoint Naval Air Station in the fall of '41, and I remember telling my dad that my mother just had a fear of airplanes, and so I told him not to tell her anything about it, because if I maybe wouldn't make it anyway, and they washed out half the people at Sandpoint. It was called an E-base, elimination base. And I said, if I get in, why then it's a fait accompli. That's it. She'd have to get used to it. Everybody remembers December 7th and what they were doing and where they were, and I remember I was on my way up skiing at Mount Rainier, and it was the only place we had in those days to ski. We were on the way up, and we didn't have the radio on, and we got to the Longmire, where you went into the park, and the ranger said, "Did you know that the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor?" No, we hadn't heard anything about it. And so we turned on the radio, and then went up and skied all day, and coming back, why, there was all these demands that everybody report to duty and at your base and so forth. And so I went to Sandpoint, and from then on it was a different life for 4 years, that's for sure. I had no idea about the automobile business when you were halfway around the world someplace. And I remember writing to my mother, and I knew my dad was kind of holding on to the business and so on, so that when I came home I'd have the dealership to do. And I tried to tell her, I don't know what I'm going to want to do when I get back. That was the furthest thing from my mind. And I said, I don't want him to be disappointed, because I don't know what I'm going to do. But I did finally come back and thought, well, I'll help out at the dealership. And as I had worked there before the war, somewhat in the sales department, and all of a sudden I was up to my ears in the dealership, and my dad was gone. He'd had enough of it over the years, and he was an inventor. He had the things he wanted to do. So that's the way I got into the automobile business, and enjoyed it. It was I had a saying that we had lots of ups and downs over the years, and good years and bad years, and I had one standard answer. I said, well, it's exciting. And whether it was up or down, it was always an exciting business. After the war, as I said, we had to expand and get a showroom, and we had lots of aspirations of what we wanted to do. And next door was a Texaco dealership. There's gasoline, and we leased that and sold tires and oil and gas and so forth. And we tried to, I remember going to Los Angeles, Texaco, to see if we couldn't buy that property so we could make that into a showroom and expand. And oil companies, they buy property, they don't ever sell it. It's just going up in value. So couldn't buy that, and it's interesting that we weren't smart enough to figure what we should do, but fate takes you by the hand. And so we started looking elsewhere, and we looked out south of Main Street, and there was an area there that we contemplated buying, but it wasn't big enough, and we figured we wanted to buy for the future. So we did finally put a deposit on some property out about 5 blocks out of town near the city park, which was the only park we had. And it was a nice park, and still is. And so word got around that they were going to build a garage right in these people's front yard and so forth. And we didn't think, well, there was enough problem making a change. We didn't want anybody against us. So reluctantly, we went across the street to a bulb farm where the dealership is today. And we were kind of forced to build over there. And of course, it's the best thing that could have happened. But we weren't smart enough to figure it out ourselves. It just happened. And but we did have good luck building the building. It was right after the war, so my dad and I started in 47, I guess, and then opened in the middle of 48. And we had people in California and so forth, because it was at the time, a modern showroom, kind of lots of glass and so forth. And so Ford Motor had people come from far and near, and we had 10,000 people, I remember, for the opening. And I had a orchestra from the University of Washington. A fraternity brother of mine had a band and played for a lot of university functions, and had him come out, and we had a great weekend. And I see the picture here of a 49 Ford with our lubrication department that we built, and so it was a good experience. Little Detroit of the West, and in those days, most of the cars were from Detroit, and so that got to be for over years. It was when you talked about Auburn, it was a place to come and buy a car, Little Detroit of the West. Ed Geary got that started. He had the radio station here, and just a very affable, neat guy, and he knew all the dealers, and so he'd go from dealer to dealer, and we had an Auburn Auto Dealer Association. I think we started out with race cars up at Federal Way or something, and had the Auburn Auto Dealers, and we'd advertise it. And then we got into billboards and various types of advertising, and then we, of course, on the local Ed's radio programs and so forth. I always had the feeling that if we had 10 or 12 dealers and you spent X number of dollars, that you could spend a tenth of that or so out of your own dealership, and still it would bring people to Auburn. And if they were looking for a Chevrolet or a Buick or a Ford or whatever, you'd get your share of the people that came to town. And so I think it was a good thing. I worked for quite a few years, and I don't know how Auburn ended up with so many dealerships. As you know, today you can drive from here to Kent, and until you get to the river, it's all new and used car operations. And my brother Bowen has a dealership in Kent, the Ford dealership, which we bought in '58, and he took that over and done a great job with it. But here we've got practically every make and model and used car dealers. And my brother Bowen, Kent's now 2 or 3 times larger than Auburn, and he's the only dealership there. And it's kind of incongruous that he's the only one there, and we've got all these dealers down here. Seems like a magnet. We seem to, and it is one of the highest populated areas of automobile dealerships. Like most small towns, they've grown outside, and like we have the Auburn Mall south, and then north of town all the way practically to the bridge to Kent is there are all kinds of different stores and shops. And when I was young, it was truly a railroad town, and the jeweler down on Main Street set the watches for the conductors and the engineers, and they had to come in once a month to get their watches checked to see they were on time and so forth. So it was quite a transition from that time. And but I think there's still been a nice spirit in Auburn of a small enough community. We're far enough from Seattle and Tacoma that it still retains its entity as an individual community. So I think it's been a good place to live, a good place to grow up and raise your children and so forth. I always like that. We have 4 children and 9 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren and so forth. But I think bringing them up here and having them go to school here was a real advantage. No, I became president of the chamber. I was on the board, and then when I came to town after the war, there was the Lions Club and the Kiwanis Club, and there wasn't a Rotary Club, and so we all became Kiwanians and had a lot of fun together. We had lunch together at the Rainbow Cafe every Thursday noon, as I remember. and it helped cohesiveness of the community, and we had projects for the schools and things that we worked toward. And then my dad had been a Kiwanian earlier, and then he was the first president of Rotary here, and got the Rotary Club started, and then subsequently my brother Cal was a Rotary president, and then my son also was Rotary president. Rotary's done a great job here in the community, but and I was pleased that my son ended up, I didn't suggest to him or anything, but he got on the YMCA board, and he got on the board here for the museum, and so we've always tried to contribute something to the community. I think that's one thing that auto dealers as a whole, all over the country, have contributed. They're part of the community, and as far as getting food for the people that need it and so forth. Well, we've worked on that for years, and most communities do that, and I think the dealers generally contribute and help the community in that way. Beyond the community, I was on the original board for 20 years at Crystal Mountain Ski Area. We got that started, and it's certainly a great place, and of course my kids all grew up on the mountain, and now my grandchildren are skiers, and we're so fortunate here to have the mountains and the sea and everything that most places don't have. It's a shame not to take advantage of it if it's there. But as I say, I think it's been a good start for our family, our children, so on. You get to know the teachers and the principals and so forth. In a small community, it's a lot bigger than it used to be, but it still has a Auburn heart. I mean, there's teams and so forth mean quite a bit to the community. I can't believe I'm as old as I am. I guess no one in my family has lasted as long as I have, shall we say. So I feel very fortunate to have had good health and done all the things I've been able to do starting out in old Auburn. So I really wouldn't want to do it any other way than if I had it to do over again, then be right here, start in Auburn. Good town, yeah.
For more historical views of Auburn, come see us at the White River Valley Museum at 918 H Street in the Lescove Community Campus, or you can visit us online at www.wrvmuseum.org. The museum is open Wednesday through Sunday from 12 to 4 p.m. Call us at 253-288-7433 for more information. Thanks for watching. Please join us again for another unique perspective on Auburn, Our Story. With every passing moment, history is made. What will yours be?